Hey everyone, it's Tara. Welcome to the Three Bookshelves and welcome to another book talk. Today, in preparation for the movie that comes out in just a few days, we'll be talking about Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Ready Player One is set in the near future of 2044 when the world is a very bleak place. It's overpopulated and in the midst of an energy crisis. But the virtual reality of the Oasis gives everyone an escape into a better world. And a better life, because everyone basically lives inside the Oasis. Kids go to virtual schools and adults have virtual jobs. You can go shopping at virtual stores, go to virtual movie theaters, and virtual libraries. Everything is within the Oasis. When James Halliday, the creator of the Oasis, dies, he wills his vast fortune and control of the Oasis itself to the single person who can find the Easter egg that he's hidden inside it. The hunt for the egg becomes a way of life for a lot of people, but no one makes a single inch of progress in 5 whole years. Enter our hero, Wade Watts. Wade lives in poverty in the real world, but in the Oasis, he's actually pretty poor there too. His avatar, Parzival, is stuck at level 1 and stranded on the planet where he attends school. That doesn't stop Wade from dedicating his entire life to finding Halliday's egg, but he hasn't made it any further on that quest than anybody else. Until he does. A name finally appears on the Easter egg scoreboard and the game is on. Suddenly thousands of people are back in the game, including your everyday evil corporation, Innovative Online Industries, or IOI, who is bent on taking over and monetizing the Oasis. Parzival and his Oasis friends, H, Artemis, Dido, and Shoto, must race to find the egg before IOI can destroy their only escape from the ravaged real world. This book talk is Riversong approved, spoiler free, so you are free to stay and watch every single second even if you haven't read the book yet. And if you haven't, what are you waiting for? Go now, go read the book. Actually stay here and watch the rest of this video, but then go and read the book. If you haven't picked up this book because sci-fi just isn't your thing, I promise you there is something in there that will appeal to you. Ready Player One is indeed the most rip-roaringly fun sci-fi adventure that doesn't include a TARDIS, but it is so much more than that. It is the perfect modern hero's journey. It's a statement on the dangers of our increasingly online lifestyles. It is every gamer's wildest dream come true. It's 372 pages of nostalgia for anyone who grew up in the 80s. It's a scavenger hunt in the story and also in the experience of reading it. It's even got a little bit of light romance that will make you think pretty deeply. And last but not least, it is the modern geek's Bible. Although if you are a geek, you've already read this book, I don't have to convince you. If you can't already tell, I love Ready Player One. I was maybe a third of the way through it before it had cemented a place in my top 10 favorite books of all time. I have raved about this book to everybody I know, but I think so far I've only convinced one person to read it. Hopefully that track record's about to change. To keep this book talk somewhat structured, I'm gonna go through all the aspects I just mentioned and unpack every one of them. Starting with Ready Player One as the modern hero's journey. We have seen the hero's journey walked by hundreds of different characters, from Frodo to Neo, from Luke Skywalker to Harry Potter, but Ready Player One is a hero's journey like you've never seen before. First of all, it's set against the backdrop that's a lot like a lot of the hero's journeys we know and love. There are undead wizards and enchanted swords. There are robots and spaceships and robots that are also spaceships. But it's all virtual reality. It's all just a game. And in that sense, it's kind of a parody of the typical hero's journey. And while our hero does embark on a grand quest, it's not about defeating the dark side or destroying a ring of ultimate power. No, he's just solving some riddles and playing arcade games and searching for a little bit of code hidden in a computer program. But despite its simplicity, it manages to be just as epic a quest, maybe because it's one that any of us could go on ourselves. Let's be honest, we're never going to discover that we can use magic or that we are destined to save all of humanity, but it's not that far-fetched to think we might participate in what's basically just a big trivia contest. And okay, maybe sort of save humanity too. But not from the forces of evil. No, Ready Player One has a much more intimidating villain in IOI. How can they possibly be worse than the guys trying to blow up planets and subjugate an entire race and completely wipe out mankind? Because we're never going to have to fight the forces of evil ourselves, but it's almost inevitable that our lifestyle will be threatened by a powerful corporation that's just out to make a buck. IOI is so menacing because their threat is so real. The Oasis is essentially free to use, aside from the initial cost of the console itself, but IOI wants to change that and start charging monthly fees that most people won't be able to afford, which means the Oasis will become inaccessible to all but the wealthy. Imagine, if you will, that all of the phone service and internet service providers in the entire world suddenly jacked their monthly fees to $10,000. How much would that change the world? How much would it change your world? No more email or texting, no more Facebook or Instagram, no more Netflix or YouTube, no more instant answers to almost any question you can ask. I mean, sure, we'd survive. We managed for thousands of years without the internet after all. But the lifestyle we've become accustomed to and dependent on would drastically change. An entire generation would be facing a world they have literally never experienced before. That is the threat that looms over most of the world in Ready Player One if IOI finds the egg and gains gains control of the Oasis. And that is pretty terrifying. And that makes a good segue into how Ready Player One makes a statement about our online lifestyles. I will admit that there is a lack of dialogue and interaction between characters throughout the book, and it can be a little bit off-putting at times, but Wade's a pretty antisocial guy. So the isolation makes sense within the story and is true to his character. And it's true to a lot of our lives too. I was something of an introvert growing up and would rather have spent time with a book or a video game than actual people. And though I wouldn't call myself an introvert now, most of my hobbies are still single-player ones. Not to mention I'm a stay-at-home mom, so most of the social interaction I do get is with a person whose entire vocabulary consists of 2 words. With the internet and all it has to offer, it is easy to isolate ourselves behind a screen. And sure, we might have social interaction through that screen, but most of the time it's just liking a status on Facebook or glancing at pictures as they whiz by your Instagram feed. And that's not really interaction at all. 2 other characters in Ready Player One, H and Artemis, represent another facet of modern online life in that we can be anonymous and faceless behind a username, or create entirely new identities for ourselves, or just manipulate the ones we already have with Photoshop and filters, or only sharing the Insta-worthy moments of our lives. And if we're only showing our friends these carefully hand-picked fragments of ourselves, how deep can that connection really go? All 3 of our main characters have fantastic arcs in which they start out hiding behind their avatars and behind the walls that they put up between themselves and other people, but eventually push past those self-imposed boundaries to become fuller and truer versions of themselves. Through these characters and their arcs, Ready Player One makes an important statement on the perils of living too much of our lives online and presenting too much of a perfect but ultimately dishonest picture of our lives to the people in them. It encourages us to bring down that screen and bring down those walls and just be ourselves. At one point in the story, a certain character gives some sage advice to Wade. I never felt at home in the real world. I didn't know how to connect with the people there. I was afraid for all of my life. And then I realized, as terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place where you can find true happiness, because reality is real. And that is advice I think we should all take to heart. Okay, that was pretty deep. Let's lighten things up a little bit and talk about how Ready Player One is every gamer's wildest dream come true. I'm not a gamer in the typical sense of the word today, but I grew up on video games, especially old school RPGs, and throughout my teens and 20s, I was obsessed with The Sims, and just a few years ago, I started playing Dungeons & Dragons. So I had a huge geekasm over the concept of the Oasis and living a second life through your avatar and the quest for Halliday's egg. The first few chapters read a little bit like a history textbook about James Halliday's life and the birth of the Oasis and the adventures, or lack thereof, of Wade's avatar Parzival. Usually when a book starts off with a big info dump, it's not a good thing, but I did not once consider putting down Ready Player One, and even on rereads, I don't skim or skip those first few chapters because I am so fascinated by the Oasis. I mean, what gamer hasn't wished for a completely immersive virtual reality like that? Who hasn't wanted to completely reinvent themselves from the bottom up, choose a new name, craft your appearance, give yourself blue hair and fairy wings and a dragon's tail, anything that you can think of? Who hasn't wanted to go on epic adventures in incredible worlds? Who hasn't wished that they could step into the world of their favorite book or movie or video game? I mean, could you imagine actually learning magic at Hogwarts, or taking a trip in the TARDIS, or battling dragons in Skyrim? Oh, I want the Oasis so bad! But maybe without the near-apocalyptic dystopia. I have never seen anything like that done in any book or any movie, so I loved living in the Oasis vicariously through Wade. If you're more into retro arcade games than modern RPGs, and you look back on the simpler technology of the 80s with a wistful smile, don't worry, Ready Player One's got you covered. James Halliday was obsessed with 80s pop culture, so the entire quest for the egg is just steeped in it. All the puzzles and riddles are based on games and movies and TV shows and music from the 80s. If you were a teenager in the 80s, get ready for one hell of a blast from the past. And if you weren't, that's okay too. I was around for most of the 80s, but too young to remember any of it, so most of the references in Ready Player One just went right over my head. I had to put the book down every few pages to Google some song or movie clip or arcade game, and that might be annoying to some people, but honestly, it's one of the things I loved most about this book. It is amazing that we have so much history and information literally in our pockets that I can read a reference to a song in a book and within seconds be listening to that song online. I am old enough to remember a time when that was not only not possible, but not even on our radar of things that might be possible someday. So being able to utilize that technology now as part of reading and enjoying a book blows my mind. It was so much fun to learn about and experience all the music and movies and games that Wade comes across throughout the story. It kind of felt like I was on a scavenger hunt just as much as he was. Speaking of scavenger hunts, oh my god, this was a good one. All the riddles, the challenges, the race against romance times so much fun. If you enjoy Dan Brown's Robert Langdon novels, Ready Player One is right up your alley because it has the same kind of brain teasers but in a much lighter way. If you don't know much about 80s pop culture, you probably won't be able to solve any of the riddles on your own, but that doesn't take away from the enjoyment of watching Wade decipher them. Now, the people who are hunting for Halliday's egg do know about 80s pop culture. They know everything about 80s pop culture, and yet it took 5 whole years for someone to solve that first riddle. And the first riddle is the easiest one. I figured it out as soon as I read it. Not the D&D reference, I would never have gotten that on my own, but the planet where the copper key was hidden. It was so obvious. I did not do so well with the rest of the riddles, but it is highly improbable that no one would have remembered the very popular game that's hinted at in one of them, or recognized the song lyric that pops up at the third gate any faster than they did. It takes a great deal of suspension of disbelief to buy that. This is the one and only thing I didn't like about Ready Player One. It really, really bothered me, but obviously not enough to not still absolutely love the book. And now on to that romance I mentioned. If you love a dash of love in any book that you read, you will enjoy the romance in Ready Player One. But if you don't worry. The romance subplot does influence Wade's motivations and choices, but it does not overwhelm the story. What I love most about the relationship in Ready Player One is that, again, it's just so relatable and so relevant to our modern lifestyles. Without getting too spoilery, Wade meets and falls for someone inside the Oasis, and it brings up the question of whether we can truly know and truly love someone that we've never met in real life. I'm willing to bet that every single one of us has either been in or knows someone who's been in a relationship that started online. I myself had an online boyfriend when I was 16, and that was way back in 1999 when admitting to dating someone online made people look at you like. But here in 2018, it is extremely common. Sometimes people find each other online and meet up IRL within days. Sometimes they live on 2 different continents and their relationship is solely online and over the phone for years. But the problem with falling in love online is this. Can you trust that the online persona you are falling in love with is an accurate representation of that person's true self? As I said before, the internet allows us to manipulate our identities by only sharing what we handpick as acceptable for others to see. And the Oasis goes even further than that by allowing people to entirely recreate themselves in their avatars. At one point in the story, Wade's love interest says straight up, "You only know what I want you to know. You only see what I want you to see." So is a relationship like that doomed to fail? Maybe, maybe not. But I love that Ready Player One asks that question and makes you think about your own relationships. And I love that it does it in the framework of what I promise is a light and sweet romance. And last but not least, to all the geeks and nerds out there who have not yet read Ready Player One, and let me preface this by saying that I am a huge geek myself. I mean, I play Dungeons and Dragons. Doesn't get much geekier than that. If there were an award for the geekiest novel ever written, Ready Player One would blow the competition out of the water. Let's look at the evidence, shall we? It is about a hunt for an Easter egg hidden inside a virtual reality video game. The big bad's big threat is charging more money for a monthly subscription to that video game. There are countless references to other games and movies and TV shows throughout the book. The protagonist is obsessed with a fandom, and it's precisely that obsession that gets him ahead in his quest. The protagonist falls for someone he met online. The characters literally earn experience points and level up. It's so wonderfully geeky. I embrace and celebrate my geekiness now, but that wasn't always the case. When I was 13, the internet as we know it today was just being born. Nowadays, it's weird if you don't have an online presence, but back then, if you were hanging out in chat rooms or part of any kind of online community, it made you a social outcast. And don't even get me started on how unacceptable it was to know HTML or to write fanfic or to have a best friend that you've never met in real life. This was also before wearing glasses was cool, so the odds were really stacked against me. As someone who dealt with a lot of insecurity over her geekiness and who found comfort in the anonymity of the internet and in connecting online with other kindred spirits, I relate so much with Wade and Artemis and H. And maybe that's why I love Ready Player One as much as I do. The story is great and the adventure is fun, but what really makes this book unique is that the characters are like me in a way I don't think I've ever found in a book before. They're geeks. Before I wrap up, I want to quickly mention the movie that hits theaters on March 30th. I've been waiting for a Ready Player One movie for years, and now that it's almost here, I am pretty nervous about it. Judging by the trailers, they changed a lot. A lot. I can usually appreciate the reasoning behind big changes, but I just don't know with this one. I will be doing a full video on the Ready Player One movie and how it stacks up against the book sometime next month, so stay tuned for that. I rate Ready Player One by Ernest Cline 5 out of 5 stars. Who's surprised? This may not be the most well-written book or the most emotionally impactful book, but it is definitely one of the most enjoyable books I have ever read. And what did you guys think about Ready Player One? Do you love it? Do you hate it? If you haven't read it yet, have I convinced you? Let me know down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button if you enjoyed my ramblings on this amazing book, and subscribe if you don't want to miss my ramblings on what I hope will be an amazing movie. Until next time, everybody, happy reading. Bye. But the problem with falling online is this. But the problem with falling online. But the problem with falling online. But the problem with falling online. Oh god. But the problem with falling online. But the problem with falling in love online. Oh my god.